Hello, welcome to the Intergene Digital Summit. Today we're going to be discussing AI in medical writing. I'm Lisa Chamberlain-James. I'm a senior partner at Trilogy Writing Consulting, and I'm delighted to be joined today by an expert panel who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. But first, what do we mean by AI? It's a catch-all term that is often misused or misinterpreted, and it encompasses everything from machine learning and NLP right the way through to ChatGPT. So for our discussion today, we're going to use AI to mean any tool that is using automation, including generative and rule-based elements, to complete tasks in the production of regulatory documents. It's a big ask to expect that medical writing can be completely done by AI. So it's also important to ask where it should be applied and what the experienced medical writer should be looking for when they're evaluating tools to make sure they are truly helping them. There are also concerns about quality and accuracy that we're going to discuss, and we will think about regulatory guidance. Since new guidance is expected, what would we like it to include from a medical writing perspective? But first, introductions. I'm joined today by three thought leaders in the area: Karen Rutkowski, Julia Furjanich-Klaproth, and Tatiana Wanderer. I will pass the ball first to Karen to tell you a little bit about herself and her experience with AI tools. Karen?
Hi, thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Karen Rutkowski, and I am the Global Head of Medical Writing at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. And I've been working for the past, I would say, maybe 2-3 years. We've been evaluating different tools, looking for opportunities for us to enhance the way that we develop our regulatory documents. So this is a great time to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Julia?
Thanks, Lisa. I'm also super excited to be doing this today with all of you. I'm Julia Furjanich-Klaproth. I'm senior partner at Trilogy Writing and Consulting. And I was involved in developing an AI tool at my company for the purpose of producing clinical study reports. So that's my background.
Thank you. Tatiana.
Hello, I'm Tatiana Wanderer. I'm the head of medical writing and clinical trial transparency at Moderna. I think historically throughout my career, I've been very interested in tools, and certainly in my current role in Moderna, I'm working with the team to ensure that we're using the latest technology that is possible for our medical writing and transparency efforts. And I'm really excited to speak with all of you today and learn from you.
Thank you so much. Before we start, the obligatory disclaimer: all panelists represent themselves today, and their statements are not endorsed, nor do they represent the current strategy or approaches by their employers. So now that we've cleared the obligatory disclaimer, let's get into the fun stuff. So Julia, let's start with you. Can you give us an idea of your understanding of what AI can and cannot do today for producing documents?
Sure, I'd love to. So on the one hand, AI, when it's being used to produce these regulatory documents, can already do a lot already. I think it's quite impressive, actually, what it's able to do. It can pull together all kinds of background information from source documents like protocols, statistical analysis plans, literature. It can create the methods section of a report. It can comb through data from statistical outputs and write meaningful sentences about whether there are clinically relevant differences between treatment groups. It can create index tables and figures about those data. So it really can already do a lot. And it can do those things much faster than a human can manually. But what it can't do, and I know from our developers that they're not sure it ever really will be able to, is interpret the data. Even if it's writing sentences that look like it's interpreted the data, it hasn't, because AI doesn't think. What it does is it reproduces patterns, or it follows rules, or a combination of both. So yes, it can highlight differences between treatment groups, but we, the humans, need to look at what it's written and think about what those differences mean in the context of the bigger picture. And something else that it isn't going to do, or doesn't do yet at least, is, if you get the statistical outputs and there's something funky in there, For example, I remember I was working on a study report years ago, and the demographics table that came out, it was a study for oral contraceptives in women. And the demographics table in the first draft that came out said it was a population that was 100% men. Now, right now, the AI tools would write, and the population was 100% men. But of course, we, the humans, as soon as we looked at that table, went, hang on a second. There are no men in this study. Why is it saying it's 100% men? And we went back and we talked to the programmers and we had it fixed. And I think that's what's really important for us to understand, is that it can make a really convincing job of sounding like it's talking about the data, like it knows what it all means. But it doesn't. It's simply able to put things down on paper that are already there. And we are the important piece. It's the human in the loop that's essential at this stage to make sure that what we're producing is really truthful and meaningful.
I love that phrase, a human in the loop. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing that a lot today. Tatiana, let me come to you. Do you agree? Is your perspective slightly different?
I agree in so many ways. And I would also say that technology is an evolving paradigm, right? I think we are going to see that what it can do now is somewhat limited, but as technology evolves, we might see more and more opportunities. Now, one thing that I should mention is that no matter how advanced technology gets, it will not change the relationships between people at work, and it will not change your process. So I think as I think about technology evolution and technology implementation, I really try to think about these foundational concepts of ensuring that when we roll technology into an organization, that we really prepare the people in the organization and the processes in the organization to adopt that technology effectively, no matter at what level this technology is performing. Whereas it's very basic or extremely advanced, those are the real pillars that will hold that technology up as the technology moves forward.
We're back to humans again. I love it. And I think that's an aspect that is very often overlooked. Absolutely agree. Karen.
So, of course, I agree with everything that's been said so far. One of the things I think that we can focus on for what the AI can do for us is really helping us to transform text for different audiences and to do that very quickly. And then thinking about what AI maybe cannot do, right? It's not going to be able to replace, as we've already heard, interpretation. It's not going to be able to replace the time people need to review. And we still have to validate our data. We have to make sure that there isn't any proprietary information in our data in the output. And also when you're thinking about if you're using an open system, there's a concern for plagiarism. So you really have to make sure that you're looking at what is being prepared and ensuring that it is appropriate and accurate.
Absolutely. So Tatiana, I'd like to come back to you because Karen's just made some really, really valid points. Why are we bothering to look to technology to help us, given that there are concerns that I'm sure we're going to dig into a little bit more? So what's driving this, do you think?
So I would say that medical writers in general are an exceptional group of people. I think so many are so talented and so educated that it behooves us to use the most of our education and experience in every minute of our life, right? So I think this, the tendency to try to automate as many tasks as possible that may not require the kind of intensity and experience and understanding, and to really be able to focus ourselves on things that are strategic, that are thoughtful, like Karen suggested, has been a really important driver throughout the years for us to try to automate. And of course, there are institutional goals, right? Every institution wants to do things faster and more accurately and cheaper, to be honest, right? So we are always in that flow of technology evolution, and it is up to us to adopt. But I would argue that adopting will enable us to perform at our highest value that we can bring.
That's a very powerful driver, I agree. So Julia, for the tools that you're using at the moment, the tech that you're using, how are you using the tools? What are you using them for?
Well, the primary tool we're using right now is really to produce the clinical study report. And it was designed to produce an initial draft of that report. So, it pulls together the methods, it takes the data, it highlights signals if there's differences between treatment groups and puts those all down there. And by design, the medical writer still needs to come in and look at all of those pieces and decide together with the SMEs on the team what we want to say about those, how we're going to weave those pieces together and tie it into the overall messaging about what this study has shown us.
Okay. Karen, Tatiana, are you using tech in the same way, or are you using your tools to something different?
We don't have any homegrown tools. We're using tools that are available to us. So also creating first drafts of study reports. We're creating drafts of protocols as well. And we're using a closed internal system of ChatGPT for transforming language, for audience appropriate text conversion, and the creation of scripts for automation of some of the medical writing tasks, thinking about comments and responses and how we organize all of that information. And we are also using our ChatGPT, finding plain language terms for our scientific and medical terminology, and trying to do that in real time so we can get agreement from folks that this term equals this plain language term, and hopefully saving time down the road as we're creating more of that patient-facing material.
And Tatiana, how are you using yours?
For us, in addition to what Julia and Karen highlighted, I would also like to highlight some additional uses, such as the process uses, right? I think medical writing processes sometimes get really complicated, right? So we have a few ChatGPT helpers that can help the writer and the team through the process to ensure that we have crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. We're also are really focused on just daily small tasks and adoption of this technology as a really co-worker that I'm constantly interacting with, interfacing with. So for me, as I create my quarterly reviews, as I create emails that I need to make sure have the right tone, we also tend to really focus on pulling ChatGPT in to help us with these tasks.
Tiana, sorry, I'm just going to comment on that. That's a really interesting point, because one of the things I didn't think about is how it's being applied. So yes, we're using it to produce a first draft of a CSR, but one of the places that it's actually sort of bled into is upstream. So the data review meetings that the teams have, they'll run it through the tool and then utilize those outputs already to discuss the outputs. So it is modifying a little bit the way, or it's moving into other areas. It's not just, CSR and that's it.
Do you think there are other ways that the interaction with the authoring teams has changed because they're using technology more?
Well, I would imagine that all of the panelists here remember going through just pages and pages of physical tables with a highlighter, trying to figure out what is happening and what is significant, right? In our youth, some time ago. So having an ability to have a machine synthesize these data and give us some ideas about what patterns it is observing. It is not panacea. It is not going to be 100% accurate or 100% clinically relevant every time, but it does give that sort of a validation or a second pair of eyes that can be a Kickstarter for discussion. So I love, Julia, that you're using it that way. And certainly that's a fantastic way to do that.
Right. Karen, do you think the days of dummy data are gone forever? Are we going to be able to use real data from the start?
Possibly, but I do think it's helpful. One of the ways in which we want to use our CSR rating tool as an example is to take our fake data, mock data, and run it through and create that draft report and allow the team to review the planned in-text tables and how we intend to tell the story throughout the CSR. Right now, we're looking at things in a very static manner. We look at tables, listing one after another. You don't really appreciate, is this table saying what it needs to say, until you see it with words inside your document.
That's true.
So we've heard a lot about efficiency and getting things through more quickly. And obviously that's the first thing everybody thinks about. When you talk about AI, everyone's thinking speed. But do you think that was the main motivator for all of you when you were looking at adopting tech, or do you think it's the main motive for everybody? Or do you think we actually should be looking at another metric, perhaps quality or accuracy? What do you think is the main driver behind it?
From my perspective, all of these things are drivers, right? And as technology evolves, we hope to be faster. We hope to be more efficient. We hope to be more precise. And I trust that as technology does continue to evolve, all of these aspects of its capability continue to evolve. And also, I think what I mentioned earlier is true in that we have to still look at the process, and we still have to look at the people who are executing on the process. One good example is, when we started playing with these, with the generation of text from tables, it's hard for some writers, and it's certainly very difficult for team members to read the language and not want to fiddle with it to make it yours, right? And if I'm going to run, 1,000 tables through a machine and have it generate text, but then I'm going to rewrite it, the whole thing, and my team members are going to also rewrite it, then you lose the efficiency that you are hoping for. So you have to really get everybody, you have to achieve that consensus and working with the people who are going to be receiving the product of technology, and the process underlying the technology evolution has to support the endpoints that you're hoping to achieve with the rollout. So I found that even though going into the adoption and development of technology, it felt like a really easy equation, right? Roll out technology will be faster. There's a lot that goes into it to make sure that it actually brings a KPI that you're looking for.
Absolutely. One of the things that we discovered as we were developing the tool, initially we thought, yeah, this is about speed, right? This is about getting rid of all that mundane work that takes us a lot of time to do manually. But what we realized as we began using the outputs was another key driver is the sanity check of knowing you haven't overlooked something, because it goes through, the tool goes through the data much more consistently than humans do, right? Humans get tired. All those tables you were talking about, by the time you get to page 1,563, you've got some drool coming out of the side of your mouth. And we overlook things. We overlook differences between treatment groups that we should be talking about, and the tools don't. And so that for us became a really important driver. And I know what I hear from the medical writers who are using the tool, frequently they'll say, if I get a new set of data, I'm going to run it through just to see what it says, just to see what it finds, to give me that sanity check. They really lean into it in terms of the making sure we're not missing anything.
It's a safety blanket, right? You feel like there's a second set of eyes that aren't tired and haven't had a bad Friday and are going a bit blurry at that time of night. Yeah, I hear you. Karen, how important do you think the quality metric is? It's something that nobody is offering 100% accuracy, obviously, and humans aren't 100% accurate, but it's a little bit, it sits very uneasily with me and with a lot of people, because you expect computers to be 100% accurate. So what level of accuracy do you think is okay? Or do you think quality actually isn't as important as efficiency?
I think quality is very important. And I like the idea of, as we're developing content, electronically using the technology. It is just more fact-based, and it may run through all of your output, for example, and highlight for you anytime that you have a delta from your baseline that you might need to speak to. When you're doing that manually, you could miss things. When you're doing it, when the computer is doing it, you would expect that it would catch maybe more, hopefully more, than your human eye will catch as you get tired, as Julia mentioned. So I think it allows us that opportunity to have a more robust document for review and discussion, debate, interpretation, all the way through. So rather than doing that, you still have to do the check at the end. So I don't want to minimize that need. In my world, you're always having to verify what you do, no matter who did what before you.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, to look at the delta. And so perhaps what we should be looking for is tools that can highlight when they see a difference rather than just ignore it or just leave a blank bit on the page or in the table. So that's really interesting, which brings me on to my next question. Let's be a bit bananas, and in an ideal world, what would you really like to see AI tools doing? Aside from making a nice cup of tea and bringing Brad Pitt around for dinner, aside from all of that good stuff, what would you like to see AI tools do? Let's start with Karen.
So I'm interested in that cross-document check and consistency, right? For us now, we're working on, when we have a submission, for example, time is tight, and gone for us are the days of sequential authoring of documents, building up, right, to your top document, thinking about maybe a label. So having the ability to, as you're working on one document, have that cross-check and allow for efficiency across all of your different modules, that to me is something that we run out of time for at the end. It can impact your quality. So that's a big a wish list for me, to get to that point where I can press that button and do that cross-check.
I've still got Brad Pitt on my wish list, but we'll move on. Tatiana, what's on your
I
wish
would add myself to the Brad Pitt agenda.
I can share.
Well, I would actually maybe even add to Karen's wish list too, because I would love to be able to check across documents. And another thing that I would love to do is get help from AI as we incorporate comments across the let's say a submission, right? So if one of my reviewers made a comment here, I would love AI to say, hey, there's similar information in 10 other places. What do you think about changing that? Right? Wouldn't that be helpful? I think right now we're really focused on tackling that first draft paradigm. I would love to see us take that further into the review cycles to really tackle those.
That sounds amazing. Julia, do you have a wish list, or are you just going to add yourself to the Brad Pitt team of appreciation?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Karen, are there any document types that you think are more able to be supported now in the near future through AI? Maybe to do with authoring, review QC, or editorial? Do you think there's a particular document type, or do you think it can be applied across the board?
I think it can be fairly broadly applied, not so limited to one document type. For me, it's more that threading everything together. So that's really where my focus is.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So I've played good cop. I'm now going to be bad cop. What do you think shouldn't be allowed in terms of what an AI tool should be able to do? Or how should we not be using AI tools? It's, I've been very glibly saying, it can make the tea and bring me back Brad Pitt, but there are very serious guardrails we need to put in place here. So let's start with Julia. What do you think we should be cautious about looking at AI to do?
Well, to pick up on what Karen was saying with the validation, I think it should never be used to produce something that's considered a complete and final draft without a medical writer in the loop who, is not only just refining what it puts out, but is validating all of the text that it's written. I think particularly generative AI, it creates text based on patterns of all of the different things that it's looked at. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand what that means. What it means is when it's talking about something, let's say in a subject narrative, as an example, it thinks about what it's seen in all the other thousands of subject narratives. And in the particular context of what's happened here, it says, what did I see in all the other similar cases? And it can weave in details that it saw always in those other contexts that would appear plausible, but actually aren't real, because that's just how text and all of the other things it looked at, all the things it learned from looked like. So I think in this setting, if we understand that really, truly, every single fact needs to be checked, no matter how minor. Just to give an example, I heard about a case of a subject narrative that was written by a ChatGPT style tool. And it was a narrative about a man who'd had a heart attack and died. And the narrative that was written by the tool described how the man had been hiking on a mountain when he had the heart attack and then he died. Except that he'd never been on a mountain. When he had the heart attack, he wasn't anywhere close to a mountain. And this type of detail is the type of thing that seems perfectly plausible. And it would be easily accepted by anyone reading that text, right? Because it makes sense. The danger is that it hints at a reason for the heart attack, namely the exertion of, being out hiking on a mountain, that could distract from whether or not the treatment could have been the cause. And I think there's a real danger if we don't check every single fact. We have to be hypervigilant when checking the outputs that are being produced by generative AI systems.
QC is going to become even more important, I feel, in the future.
Absolutely.
Tatiana, do you agree? Is there anything else you'd like to add to this list?
I agree. And I wonder also, just as we think about the evolution of this technology, right? Right now, we can see its fallibilities. But as technology becomes more mature and, here we are, we're experts. We have been learning about this. We've been playing with it. We see its flaws. But as technology evolves and becomes more capable, who is there to say that we wouldn't have back checks to make sure that there are no hallucinations in the future and so forth, right? But as we continue moving in the evolution of technology, that idea that technology is not infallible, I think is really critical for us to hang on to, is to really remember this very moment when we said, watch out for this, watch out for this, watch out for this, taken 10, 15 years from now, when what we see coming from technology to us looks a lot more refined, a lot more miraculous, perhaps, right? That we still have that in our mind to question and to continue critically think about the outputs that we're seeing.
I think that's really crucial. And to both of your points, we're in the infancy now. This is growing at a speed of knots, and it's going to be harder and harder for us to spot the hallucinations. They're going to become more and more plausible, which means that, QC is going to become much more important. And the human in the loop, to go back to the very first comment that Julia made, I think is going to be really, really vital. And when we're thinking about checks and balances and guardrails, it obviously brings us to the regulatory authorities. We have to think about their involvement, and there's been some guidance put out, but very little at the moment. What their stance seems to be that, well, actually, the sponsor is responsible for their own documents, and they don't see the need to comment further on that. Okay. But there's very, very little, in fact, there's no guidance relating to the AI in its usage in medical writing. And I think it's glaring by its omission. I understand why it's emitted, but it is glaring by its omission. As experts and as people who've used AI tools, what would you like to see in any forthcoming guidance or regulation? Julia, let's start with you.
Well, personally, I think it would be really helpful if the agencies to prepare at least a minimal statement about the things that anyone using an AI tool for preparing regulatory documents needs to consider in order to ensure appropriate oversight of the outputs. I mean, this is really just a direct follow-on of the conversation we just had. Nobody should be producing or developing a tool that can produce a document that could misconstrue the data and not have built-in measures to verify the statements. So I can imagine that the agencies don't want to start dictating what technologies people apply, like you said, but it'd be good to have a common guideline that addresses what companies need to be aware of when using those technologies. For example, we need to ensure that a technology is capable of generating a reproducible output every time it's used from the same data set. You know, I think the danger of a ChatGPT type system is we all know you can put in what looks like the same prompt and every time you get something different out of it. So how are we sure that we're getting something 100% reproducible? And it has to have a consistent way of identifying signals in the data. And we need to make sure that our medical writers and QC teams know how to do appropriate quality checks of everything that those systems are producing.
Absolutely. Karen, do you agree? What are your thoughts?
I do agree. I would be happy to see some type of guidance put out by the health authorities. But until that time, we're moving forward as if we're still writing our documents with a pencil and paper and having to put in all of those checks and balances to ensure that the content is accurate at the end.
And a question to the whole panel. Do you think that sponsors, medical writers, whoever's producing the documents should have to disclose that an AI tool has been involved? And if so, is there a level beyond which we actually say it doesn't matter, or should any involvement of an AI tool be disclosed? And if so, to whom? Tatiana, I'm going to come to you first with that.
Sure. So I guess conceptually, I think about technology the same way that I think about getting help from a vendor to write your report. You're still ultimately responsible for everything that you're submitting to the agency. And in that, I feel that whether we disclose that AI tool was used or whether we don't, it's almost a moot point. What we have to ensure is the accuracy of the dossier. So I guess from my perspective, I would be open to either disclosing it and I don't necessarily have a strong stand against it, because I feel that fundamentally our processes have to stand up to the bar that the agency requires us to hit.
I totally agree with you, but I'm going to play devil's advocate because what you said, Karen, is, you know, we're all writing this, or one of you said it, I forget who, we're writing them right now as if we'd done it ourselves, right? We have to have the same standard of quality control. However, I think right now, if I sit down and write a document, everybody knows I'm not going to randomly put in that the person was on a mountain while they were when they had the hike, when they had the heart attack. And I was reading actually just yesterday a medical report. And as I was reading it, I started to think, this reads like it was written by ChatGPT, but it was from a good, and I don't want to undermine it, but it was from a good journal. And I was reading it, and then I got to the end and it said that AI had been used in writing this thing. And I think it gives you context. I think by declaring it, you're making everybody aware that this was pulled together by somebody, and there's a higher responsibility then involved in making sure that everything that's in there is true. That I think that's why it's important, I would think, to declare it, because if it was written by a human, nobody thinks that there's going to be weirdness slipping in. But if it's written by ChatGPT, it can. We know it can. And then you start to go, so how do I know somebody went through and make sure they removed any of the nonsense.
So, Karen, I'm going to come to you to pick up on that. Assuming that you agree, for the sake of argument, that it should be disclosed, at what point should it be disclosed? If you've just used it to help create the first draft, should you disclose that no matter what, even though it might go through 5 or 6 iterations afterwards? Or do you feel that it should only be disclosed if it's used and there were very few iterations afterwards, and then how few is very few? What's your view on disclosure?
I think it would be hard to come up with a good framework to be very clear, like black and white, in terms of what this rule is of when you need to disclose or not. So I think I have to say, when you first raised the question, I was thinking, I have no strong feeling one way or the other. Listening to Julia, I'm persuaded now to say, I think we should disclose it if you've used it, period. And you can state how you've used it, but yep. I wouldn't try to minimize or soften how it's disclosed. You say what you did.
I think in general, transparency is always the best. Yeah. So yeah, I would totally agree. But I can see the lawyers having an absolute field day with this. I think they're in for a payday trying to argue about what should be disclosed and what shouldn't be disclosed, and when, and how that's all done. So I'm very glad that I'm not a regulator. I have to make that decision.
I think the issue is really that there are risks associated with using an AI tool that don't exist if it's done purely by a human. And we do need to be conscious of that.
And given what you and Tatiana both said earlier on, that those risks are going to be, or the errors are going to be harder and harder to spot for a human, and QC is going to become more and more important. Do you think there's a fear that because we're going to need more QC, it's going to erode any of the time efficiencies that we get from using an AI tool? Have you seen that in the tools that you've used yourselves?
So we use 100% QC anyway. So I feel for us, it does, the end process does not change, right? We still have to ensure that the quality is there. Because as humans, we make mistakes too, right? That's why we have quality control processes. I think the point there will inevitably be a point where we say, now technology is good enough. You have this large QC spend. Do you really need to do that, right? Is technology now good enough to be able to not just author, but also verify? And I think that is going to be a very interesting point in our industry, where we say, at what point the risk is small enough to justify pulling off the 100% QC. And we're certainly not there now, right? And we may never be there. But we have to be, I agree completely, we have to be very careful about making that decision should that ever come our way.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is using tools for formatting, checking against your style guide, publication requirements, publishing requirements. So I think using tools in that manner will allow the QC team to focus on the important content and maybe doing that cross-check across documents and focusing their time on the things that really need to be looked at versus those things that we need to have, but are more, let's just say, mechanical. So I think that's where we can have a more robust QC. Maybe we save time, maybe we don't, but that QC is really looking at the right things in that time frame.
I totally agree. So Tatiana, you've already answered this question. We had a couple of questions sent in ahead of time, which is fantastic. So I'm gonna pose them to you on the questioner's behalf. Tatiana, you've already answered this. So I'm going to come to Karen because you don't have an in-house tool. You sourced your tool. So the question I have for you is, how concerned are you about hallucinations? It's what we've been talking about. How do we mitigate it? And is 100% accuracy really needed?
So I worry to some degree about the hallucinations. My goodness, I can't say it. But because our approach currently is to We still review everything, look at everything, read it. You know, one of the messages we want to give to the writers is don't sit back on your laurels and have some think that this tool is taking away the value that you can bring. You need to do this. You need to look at it, read it, think about it. Does it make sense? Is it accurate? And so on. So it's not for me as much of a concern right now. I guess if we start to use it in a way that is more open, then it might become more concerning. And I think I missed the second part of your question. Sorry.
100% accuracy, but I believe that you actually answered that much earlier in the conversation where you said accuracy was extremely important. So I'm not going to make you repeat yourself with that.
Thank you.
And Julia, I know that you've been involved in developing your own tool. What about hallucinations for you, for your tool? How did you mitigate that problem?
Well, we're in a very fortunate situation because we made the decision very early on to be a completely rules-based system. So it can't hallucinate. It's always if this, then that. It's not a generative system that's based on thousands of data points that it's learned from, and it's pulling things together in that way. It has a rule, it goes in, it looks at the data, and it does what the rule dictates for every situation. So we're in a fortunate situation there in terms of it simply doesn't produce hallucinations.
Okay, fantastic. I think we have time for one more question. And this is a really good one. And we're asked a lot by our clients about this as well. How do I know when to start using a tech tool? When is a good time to start? When do you pull the trigger? A client just said to me the other day, well, you know, these tools are evolving all the time. Shouldn't I wait till next month or next year and get a better tool? There could be a better one coming out. So how did you decide when to just jump off that cliff and go for it? And I'm asking Tatiana and Karen this because obviously, Julia, you developed your own tool. So Tatiana, when did you decide to just go for it? How?
I'm not sure that I would say that we have had a go for a decision. I think that is a very natural evolution. I think especially for Moderna, where I work now, it is a very digitalized and digitally focused organization. So a lot of the digitalization is in the culture. And I think in the organizations where I worked previously, that's also have been true, right? So as the new technology has come up, there has always been people who are excited to try it, right? And whenever we get individuals who are excited to try it, excited to play with it, and can really see a difference, it is easier to bring tools on board. There isn't as much of a pushback to adoption. So for me, I would say focus on adoption, focus on culture has smooth technology integration barrier upfront. So it didn't have to be as much of a hard decision to say, okay, now we do technology.
Karen, the same for you?
So just one thought very quickly for somebody who's thinking about when to start. And I appreciate your point, Lisa, that there's never a good time, right? Because there's always something shiny and new coming around the corner. But if you look at something in your process that isn't optimal, whether it's quality, could be time, too many, in my case, far too many people wanting to have a voice in the document. When you identify something that needs to improve, that's the right time to start looking and potentially using a tech tool.
Fantastic. And that's a great thought to finish on. Thank you to my fantastic panel of expert speakers. I know we could talk about this for days on end, and we often do, but unfortunately we are out of time today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your guidance and your extreme knowledge. Thank you to everyone who's joined. The questions have come in thick and fast. Thank you for that. We will answer them all by email separately, and have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Patty. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, all.